Hello and welcome to the Fintech Show. Now in today's episode, we're going to be looking at digital transformation of platforms and how financial institutions are grappling with this significant pace of change. And joining me here today at Mambu's offices in London, I have two guests right at the heart of that topic. First up, we have Akhilesh Khera from PwC. Akhilesh, how are you doing? You good?
Very well, thanks Douglas.
Absolutely brilliant. And also joining us, we have Kunal Galav from Mambu. Kunal, how are you doing? You good?
Good, Doug. Good to see you again.
Great to see you too. Now, guys, thank you for inviting me here and explaining some of this stuff to me. But before we go any further, could we please tell our viewers a bit more about yourself? Akhilesh, if I start with you, could you let us know what you've been working on and really what excites you currently in the industry currently?
Sure, Douglas. So, for the folks who don't know me, I'm Akhilesh Khera, partner in our consulting practice in PwC, and I also lead our infinite digital banking practice. There's a bunch of digital banking transformations that is going on in the market. The pace of change which is hitting us is enormous. And we at PwC try and help our clients look at the change in a positive light and help them transform along with that to manage their customer expectations and client outcomes.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. And also, Kunal, for our viewers who might not have seen you on a previous show, could you tell us a bit more about what you've been working on?
Yeah, at Mambu, we have, like kind of what Akhilesh says, we are seeing a lot of change in the industry.
Yeah.
Where a lot of incumbent banks are now responding to neobanks, and they're like, how can we transform faster?
Yeah.
How can we address our customers' need faster? And that's where we have been powering a lot of new digital banking initiatives around the world. We have around 250 customers around the world in 65 regulated markets with 100 million end users on a platform. That makes us the largest public cloud financial services platform in the world right now.
That's amazing.
We are at the heart of the change that's happening.
You really are. So I'm actually fascinated to get your insights on this then, because you've both brought up how the traditional banks are looking at the neobanks almost with enviable eyes. But can you say to our viewers at Kunal a bit more about how it actually causes a drag on performance, these legacy platforms? Mm-hmm. What are what's the actual cost on resilience that these platforms, these legacy platforms provide?
Yeah, so I'll actually start with a number. In UK alone, where we are sitting, over the next 3 years, UK banks will spend about £1 to £2 billion on resilience efforts.
Wow.
And if you think about any incumbent bank, look at their budgets, 70% is on 70% of the budget is on regulatory and compliance activities.
Yeah.
So even though they have the budgets, they have the P&L, a lot of their activities is spent on fixing and maintaining the things which are already going on. And there's a bit of a drag, because if you want to innovate, you need to figure out how does the existing platform work, where in the code base you need to make the change, what do you need to do. So, and the biggest example is, we had seen a buy now pay later up and come down.
Yep.
And banks couldn't launch it even still. And
wow.
Now we see some of the banks were launching buy now pay later. So it's bad. It's like they have been serving their customers for the last 50, 60, 100, 150 years. And it's a bit of build-up that has happened. That sort of becomes the innovator for innovation for them.
I think it's fascinating to hear that there was finally a financial product that the masses wanted, and the banks still couldn't get the product out in time to meet that demand. Yeah. And now that the demand has subsided, they're finally getting it out, which shows that there really does need to be a pace of change. But it's not just the platforms that need changing. I believe it's a mindset change. And I believe, Akhilesh, this is where PwC must come in quite a lot. And what are the challenges when it comes to changing that mindset, that company culture, to facilitate the eventual platform change?
Very interesting question, Douglas. So, there certainly is a mindset baggage that most of banks and financial services companies carry. Now, I'm going to talk specifically around mindset challenge around digital transformation as such. And of course, there's a mindset challenge around multiple things that financial services banks carry. But just on digital transformation itself, we see that there are three broad challenges that exist out there. So the first one that we see is most banks and financial service institutions, which we work with on digital transformation, they approach digital transformation in terms of your existing business onto a new technology. Right? That doesn't really make sense, because what you want to do is to innovate your business model as well as you're trying to implement new technology. So you need to change based on the overall customer experience and overall customer expectations that you're trying to meet. So it needs to be looked at from a business model sense, rather than just, okay, I'm going to change my technology for technology's sake. The second thing that we see banks struggle with in terms of mindset is that they need to be ready that a digital transformation program will have an implication on their operating model. Right? It wouldn't be that you'd be able to sustain your existing operating model on a waterfall basis and manage and launch new customer experiences and products on an ongoing basis. So your operating model would also need to change, and that's an implication that quite a few of our clients sometimes forget, and that's a baggage that we help alleviate. The third mindset challenge that I see typically is prevarication. So people essentially a do nothing scenario.
Oh God.
A do nothing scenario is probably the worst of it all. Saying it's too big of an issue for us to solve, so let's not do it now, let's do it later. So these three mindset challenges are the ones that we're trying to alleviate in our clients and our customers.
I mean, it's fascinating that the banks are at that point where, even though they know that some of their competitors are going through that transformation, some of their competitors started out with no legacy and are able to immediately go at that point, and some are still giving that kind of pushback of, it's too big now, let's do it later. Surely the baggage of that legacy is only going to get more difficult to remove. So one thing I love to have on the show is to kind of see some benefits and some real life use cases where we've seen this change. We've seen the ability for these institutions to wake up and listen. So Kunal, if I could come to you, do you have any successful use cases where you've seen an institution go through that change?
So one example is a large bank in Australia, which wanted to launch an innovative home buying offering for their customers. It kind of ties into Akhilesh's point that stop thinking about products or the way you have your business model. So they didn't think about, oh, we've got a head of mortgages and hence we need to solve for their P&L. They thought about, okay, let's rethink it. We need to solve for our customer needs. So what goes through a customer's mind when they want to buy their home? And then they created a product which helps customers on their home buying journey suited to the customer needs. So imagine this is an incumbent bank with a significant market share in the market, a significant P&L. They decided to repivot to answer their customer needs on their home buying journey. And it's a bit of a subtle difference, but instead of thinking about a mortgage as a product, they started thinking about home buying, launched a new product in the market. They were able to get to the market in about 6 months, quite successful, with the most outstanding digital innovation products out there in Australia right now. So that's one example. We're combining with some of the points that Akhilesh said, that with a change in mindset, with a change in business model, you can actually innovate using the new technologies that are available and stop trying to sort of a lift and shift that we have done this for 100 times, let's do it again.
Yeah, because that's really the issue from the really old legacy systems from the 70s, where it was just this waterfall thing, having to wait a decade, having to go through it every decade. It's now actually, well, we've got a customer use case, we want to sell houses, not mortgages. And you can apply that innovation there. Brilliant. And Akhilesh, I'd also love to get your perspective on some use cases too.
So there are quite a few examples that come to my mind in terms of where we've helped banks transform themselves digitally. A couple of them, one of them was we launched a digital bank across 6 countries, which was a single brand across 6 countries very recently. So that was exciting. But the one actually which essentially sticks in my head is in an emerging nation, we helped launch an SME proposition, a digital SME proposition for a bank. When you look at emerging countries, you think about working capital and capital being available to SMEs and micro and small businesses. So in that particular country, only 10% of capital available is what is distributed to small and medium enterprises. Whereas when you look at places like the US, UK, and developed nations, you typically look at between 35 to 40% of capital available being available to the SMEs. So we launched a new digital proposition. This was done in about 6-8 months. It was an end-to-end product available on the mobile app, which essentially helped the economy. And today we've got about 1.5 billion pounds on that platform already, which are distributed to SMEs. So it essentially resonates with the purpose that we stand for.
Yeah.
It resonates us helping economies as well as clients solve big issues with the help of technology. And that's what we do.
What I'm hearing from this is, even though it is just an operational change, it's also a very human change, a very customer-focused change. It's not innovation for innovation's sake. So that's all well and good, because we can say, oh yeah, just change your mindset, develop these new platforms, and everything will be golden. But actually, there's a lot of work that goes in the back end, decommissioning these legacy systems. They're legacy for a reason, they've been around. Akhilesh, how does an organization go about decommissioning these legacy platforms?
So it's a very, very interesting question again, Douglas. So legacy is always a challenge for most of the larger banks.
Yeah.
As Kunal said, 70% of the bank's technology costs goes into run the bank.
Wow.
Only 30% of the technology cost goes into changing the bank. So new technology, digital transformation programs. That 70% is essentially your sunk cost into legacy technologies. Yeah. We've written a joint paper on decommissioning legacy, and our approach is what we call as greenfield on top. That's about standing up a new greenfield proposition and hollowing out the core in subsequent phases while decommissioning the legacy as you go along as well. It's a fascinating read, I hope, for your viewers as well. Please have a look.
No, and I think on our paper, one of the things we found out was nobody has the time or the appetite to do a 5-year transformation. So if you go to any bank and say, let's look at decommissioning things, nobody has the appetite to do it. And therefore, greenfield on top enables you to innovate really fast, get to customers really fast, and gradually look at what's working with the market to make your primary proposition. So it's a journey that banks need to go to, and the advantage of having the cloud, having SaaS-based offerings is you can try things. You don't need to build things. You can take the licenses, you can try things, you can offer propositions to your customer, you can be innovative and slowly change your proposition and slowly change your stack. So I don't think there's a golden ticket answer.
Yeah.
That here's a 5-point checklist, you can decommission your legacy. It takes time, but the way to do it is, as we found out, was greenfield on top with progressive modernization.
It's brilliant to know that there is a bespoke option for banks. It doesn't just have to be, you've deployed it, now it's over with. Those days are over. Now you can actually do it in a very bespoke manner or in a granular manner, which is obviously going to help save the bottom line, which is ultimately so important. But that's talking about the back end then. How can, Kunal, if I come to you, how can banks know what services to bring on, this greenfield approach? How can banks find the innovation that they know is actually going to resonate with their customers, rather than just innovate for the sake of saying, oh, we've innovated there, when actually there's no customer demand?
So it boils down to 3 things for me, for us. One is you got to solve for the customer, right? So you got to solve for what the customer needs are. And if you think about the context today, customers have Netflix, they have Prime. They are expecting the Netflix experience to come to banking.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the problem statement you need to solve for. So first is solve for the customer experience, right? Second is, I'll actually pick on what Akhilesh said earlier. Think about the operating model of a bank. Traditionally, bank has had a lending P&L, a deposit P&L, right? But that's not how customer views their life, right? Customers are expecting banks to become their personal CFOs.
Yeah.
Right? So, I have a need. I want to buy a car, I want to save for my kids' education, I want to buy a house, help me solve for my needs, right? And the third is, it's the data that is available for the customers. Like customers, they are now used to, Facebook, Google, like the data is being used to tell them insights. So customers are expecting from the banks, treat me like you know me, right? So you should know what I want before I want it.
Yeah.
So those are three things, right? Start from customer first, change the operating model, and leverage the data you have to actually solve for customers' problems.
Amazing. It really does feel like a wholesale change. This isn't just another technology change. This really is a different form of banking. And to your point, I think the customers are going to have to realize that as well. Rather than going down a shop and choosing different banking products as if you're in a supermarket, they want to just have this personal CFO which caters to all their needs.
I'll give an analogy. When iPhones used to come up, customers used to queue to buy the latest iPhone.
Yeah.
Nobody has queued up for the latest credit card, right? So that's the challenge the banks face, right? Like, how do you innovate that customers want to have a financial relationship with you? That's the problem sitting in banks.
Goldman Sachs might be close to it with the Apple Card, but we shall see. Now, with that in mind then, we've talked about the wholesale changes that need to happen, but let's get into the nitty-gritty. Akhilesh, how can banks identify emerging technologies that are actually going to have use cases, and how can they invest in these emerging technologies? One of the challenges that come with selling to the boards, effectively saying this emerging technology, it's not going away, generative AI, for instance. How can we sell that to the banks? There's got to be a bottom line to this.
So yeah, you're right. There's got to be a bottom line to things, and everything needs to be seeped into a business case, and it needs to make sense from a business perspective, right?
Yeah.
But as Kunal says, there are so many changing customer experience and customer expectations coming your way.
Yeah.
Banks need to keep up. Each financial institution, as I see it, they need to have two things in their mind. One is they need to have focus. Where are they going with their own business? When you look at retail institutions and retail banks, for example, typically deposits is their best way of new customer onboarding.
Right.
But how many banks have you seen focus on innovating anything around deposits? Nobody. So they need to think about what is their focus going forward and where do they want to play, right? Then identify what is the underlying technology which will help them with the focus. The third thing which I'm going to talk about is around speed, and is the speed of implementation and innovation. Be ready to fail fast. Not everything is about getting the first time right. You might get it wrong, but be ready to fail fast. Digital banks and digital challenges today innovate, they release customer features, they release features on the app on a weekly basis. When you look at monolith institutions and legacy banks, it takes them a 6-monthly cycle before they release even a single feature.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they need to think about what is the technology paradigm, how is changing, how does it fit into their focus for the future, and innovate at speed.
And there's one thing I'll just pick on what you said, Akhilesh, is, it's not a tech for tech problem. It's a business problem and a customer problem, and technology becomes the enabler. And that's really critical in the context of the question you asked, that CIOs and CTOs and CEOs and the boards should not think about what's the new exciting cool technology out there. They should think about what's the most relevant problem I need to solve for my business. And deposits, really good example.
Yeah.
Right? And then how do I leverage the technology? How do I leverage the skills that are available in the market? So that's a bit of a shift that's really important. It's not a technology problem anymore. It's a business problem.
I think that's fascinating to know that maybe banking itself has been so caught up in this is how we've always done it for the last 200 years, that suddenly the technology's come along and they think it's an easy ticket. Oh, we can just invest in this technology and our customers will be happy. But actually, the customers finally, because of the neobanks, have demands from their financial services. We see that in commercial banking and for SMEs. People who bank with SME banks realized that from their personal banking, they were getting far more products than they'd ever had, and realized that they wanted the same thing. So it's interesting to know this is really wholesale changes, but also the customers are changing too. And to match that, we're going to have the technology providing that, not that center stage. Kunal, we've talked very much about the operational side of these holistic changes when it comes to the technology, but also, especially here in Europe, a lot of these changes are being facilitated by regulatory changes too. What are the regulatory challenges around digital transformation, and how can institutions innovate while also remaining compliant?
Yeah, and you raise a really important point. It's fundamentally, banks are the guardians of financial money, always have to play that role, and hence we have regulations. So, and I don't think regulation is an inhibitor for digital transformation. Regulation actually helps it, and therefore, as you're going on your digital transformation journey, the mindset you need to have is, how can we leverage that to answer the questions that the regulations is asking? Like if you take GDPR as an example, right? It's not a constraint. It's to ensure that customers' data, their privacy is protected.
Yeah.
Right? Modern technology, which is built on microservices, ensures that the data that the customer gives permission to is available where you need it. So if you just turn around your question, if you think in the context of the regulation, financial services institutions are the guardians of financial money of customers, which is quite personal to everybody. And hence, new digital technologies, digital transformation enables them to make it into a competitive advantage rather than a regulatory checklist where you spend bulk of your change the bank budget to just check the box and get through.
Yeah.
So it's actually the other way around. It's a positive thing on how the industry is progressing.
It is a good, I know there was a lot of discussion about the balance between, for instance, Payment Service Directive 2 and GDPR, and where the sharing of data and also the protection of data comes in. But you're right, we have to have this conversation of who owns what data and how it's used in order to innovate and protect the customers. Now, let's take everything we've discussed here in that we've talked about regulation, innovation, tech, and most importantly, what it seems like to me, is the customer demands. But Akhilesh, how do you see the financial institutions that run on these platforms changing in the next 2 to 5 years with this kind of customer demand right down their throat?
It's a fairly broad question,
right?
So if I was to distill the way I see financial services essentially change, I see there are 3 broad factors which are probably going to affect financial services in the future. The first one is all around the blurring of lines between big tech and financial services institutions themselves. Somebody pretty wise sometime told me that consumers don't need banks, they need banking. And that's what big tech will provide in the future. And you can see it, you talked about Goldman Sachs. There is Apple Pay Later, which has gotten introduced just a month or so ago. Apple's backing its balance sheet to consumers going forward. So the blurring of line between big tech and what big tech brings to the consumers, you talked about Netflix and Amazon Prime, and that's the expectation of the consumer and the customers going forward. So that's the first big shift which will affect financial services in the future as I see it. The second is, difficult and probably not a very good word nowadays, is crypto.
Okay, yeah.
And more importantly, digital currencies. I do see there's going to be a shift into digital currencies going forward. So think about a time, say today, Kunal, if you were to launch a new currency today, would you ever come up with a paper-based fiat currency?
Yeah.
Nobody would, right? It's the age you're living in. It has to be a digital currency which can be traded and used conveniently by the customers.
Yep.
Right? So that's the second thing which will certainly happen. China is experimenting with it. UK is experimenting with it as well. So digital currencies will certainly come. And when you look at both of those parameters, there's a third parameter which you spoke about just a minute ago around data, privacy, regulations, customer protection, security, cyber. Right? So all of that, when you put those 3 things together, banks would need to fundamentally shift their business model in the future to make sure that they cater to the changing customer experiences in a completely digital world.
Yeah. And do you think banks would need to become tech companies as a result?
So banks are bits and bytes, right? So banks no longer are branches and bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
Finance as well as money is also bits and bytes.
Exactly.
When was the last time you went to a branch? I doubt you ever did. When was the last time you used a checkbook? I doubt you ever did in the last 3 to 5 years. So and hence, the movement to digital is only getting faster.
Yeah.
And the faster the banks adopt to it, the better it is.
Yeah.
Now, with that in mind, I think that's such an interesting perspective, is how the pace of innovation is exponentially increasing. So almost to your original point at the very beginning of the conversation is that you hear some banks say, it's too big of an issue now, we need to solve it, we'll solve it later. Too late, probably, if the pace of innovation changes as it is. So, Kunal, to wrap up, I want to almost have some sage wisdom that we can say to our, I don't know why I'm coming to you for this then, but
he's much older than I am.
With this in mind, with the pace of innovation changing how it is, also the customer demands changing how it is, what advice do you have to these institutions to deal with that change?
Yeah, so I'll say three things. So one is what I said earlier, start with the customer, right? Forget about you need to update your technology, forget about any changes, right? Talk to your customers, see what your customers want, and be agile to change, right? Second is what we call is the orchestration of the ecosystem. So what that means is, kind of like Akhilesh said about, big tech and, there being partnerships. So create the propositions that are suited to your customer needs. So what that means is, your customer need is, I want to buy my first home, right? So think about, okay, they'll go to a broker, they'll go to an estate agent, they would need to have a credit check, like solve the journey, right? So create the ecosystem to solve for the customer need. And the third thing is, which becomes really critical on Akhilesh's point about banks being bits and bytes, is, along with being the guardians of financial money, also be the guardians of customers' data. So you are able to become the personal CFO, your customer's friend, that is able to help customers in their journey. Like financial services or money is personal to everyone. So being there as the guardian of their data, the guardian of money, is a critical role banks need to play. And these are the three things that banks need to start acting towards.
It's a brilliant change in role. And I've heard so often so many banks think that they're going to become like WeChat in China, this one platform to rule them all. But actually, if they just become a platform that can connect the variety of financial services, the mortgage broker, the lender, everything, when you're just trying to, and the estate agent into one, that is what they need to be solving, rather than these extremists. Oh, you can buy a rail ticket on my banking app. That's almost an overextension of what open banking wants to be. Guys, thank you so much for your perspectives. It's been absolutely brilliant, and I'm really excited for the future of these banking apps, certainly. So I look forward to seeing it. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Douglas.
Yes. Thank you as well to you, our viewers. You can catch the rest of the series and much more over at ffnews.com, and of course YouTube, especially LinkedIn, where you'll see us three in the comments. Thank you very much, and goodbye.